find that technology is actually now able to push pedagogy further rather than sort of supporting it and underpinning it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, there's a real movement for knowledge. There's a real interest in the knowledge-based curriculum and the work of Hirsch and Daisy Christodoulou. And there seems to be almost, I would call it, an educational activism towards cognitive load theory and dual coding. And if you look at a lot of these sort of educational research, I mean, Sweller's cognitive loads are over 50 years old, and there's a real resurgence in the interest in this stuff. And whilst there's nothing wrong with it, I don't see an active place for cognitive load within the classroom. Like, how's it actually going to benefit the students? Well, it's not. It might benefit the teacher having knowledge of it, but what I'm more interested in is what is going to benefit the students. What can they see? What can they interact with? What can they learn from? So there's kind of the traditional and progressive argument there, and I sit right in the middle actually, although I'm more on the progressive side. But what I'm more interested in is these warm technologies that can really push learning forward. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the things that we've been using, and it's such a simplistic idea, but it's so effective, is something called a catchbox microphone. And it's a soft throwable microphone that you can throw across the classroom, and the students pick it up, even the quietest students. It gives them a voice, and they just talk through it like here at this sort of level, and it projects their voice through the speaker system. And what we've been able to do is get all of the staff and all of the students, even the quiet ones, on board with this really simple idea. And that kind of morphed into thinking, well, if they're happy to speak, let's get them presenting, because when they go into the world of work and university, one of the first things they're going to have to do is pitch an idea. So we changed our entire lesson structure. So the first 27 minutes of the lesson are what you would call direct instruction, but it's not necessarily me or the teacher stood at the front. It is new content, so it's new learning, because you can't do I guess understanding without knowledge. I accept that. So they need that knowledge initially. Then we have a bit of a break, and then we get into the students designing their presentation. So every lesson finishes with a group of 3 or 4 stood up pitching their idea like they would do in industry. And I believe that is the biggest gap that's missing in our current school system, is that preparation for them beyond the world of school into the world of work.
That's fantastic, Alex. And I guess something interesting that I see in this practice again is that you're merging the sort of traditional mindset, but actually bringing that spice with the creation of a very simple idea, but actually changing and breaking down the current structure in the classroom. As you said, it starts by the space, but also by doing these little tiny things that are not the skyrocket technology thing to bring to the classroom, but actually little tiny things that are much more applied to the real world, and they can slowly get in there. My question to you this time would be, what about the transition that nowadays I believe teachers have to cope with, being that you're teaching the generation Z, and you're going to have as well generation alphas going through their education, and they are a generation who were born with phones. They don't search on Google, they search on YouTube. They have a very strong power to convince the parents, and it's their ideas that they looked on the phone, and they're just communicating with you with a very high determination of what they want, right?
Yeah.
So how are you actually bringing the attention of the real world for those kids, which would have jobs that don't even exist yet, and yet you're building on skills for that future? How is that transition happening from what they really have now and what they will have in the years to come?
That's a great question, and I could talk a lot here about the role of AI and how I see future of education kind of rolling out. I mean, I'll talk about the here and now initially. I think the biggest thing we can do as educators in school is embed this idea of interdisciplinary learning. So if you look at the STEM or the STEAM curriculum as it's known now, I'm a huge advocate of what that achieves. And if you take coronavirus as an example of a problem that the world didn't really have the knowledge on how to deal with. I mean, we've been through the Spanish flu. We, had similar situations with world wars and other pandemics. but actually it's brought the world to its knees, and no one had the knowledge to solve it quickly, and it's affected every country. So the idea of interdisciplinary learning, I think, will play a huge part in the students' futures, because if you look at sort of the Sustainable Global Development Goals, climate change, students are so worried about climate change. They're so worried about how that's going to impact them in their lifetime. They're worried about automation and all the press that they read about the robots coming for their jobs. They're worried about overpopulation and will there be enough food? And those three things alone, our students speak about in our lessons, and they're anxious about it, and they want to come up with solutions. They want to, a bit like the Greta idea, they want to take these ideas at face value and take them on with logical solutions. Where our curriculum sits currently is subjects are siloed, as you know, into maths, science, German, history, French, and students go from one lesson to the next, and the teacher is very protective over that subject because they're accountable for the results for that cohort, for example. And I think the biggest challenge for us as educators in the future is breaking down those silos. And I'm not saying we need to go all project-based learning at all, but there needs to be some work done around interdisciplinary thinking and meta knowledge. What is meta knowledge? How do you know things across different platforms? So going back to the coronavirus example, there's history that you could apply to that. There's also science that you could look at. And beyond that, you could look at organizational skills of how you roll a vaccine out. So there's maths involved. So I think that the biggest problems in the world, like climate change and like overpopulation and enough food and automation, it's going to require interdisciplinary approach from the students in order to be able to cope with those problems in the future. And I think that's our job as educators, to start installing that.